Good morning.
Morning.
The blessing of the Lord be upon you.
We bless you in the name of the Lord.
Thank you. Intertestamental period of history. Nuts and bolts of our study. We are beginning to look at the Grecian period. We're on lesson number 12. Right slide here. Did an introductory lesson to the Grecian period last Sunday morning. So today, Lord willing, we will look at the rise of the Grecian Empire with Philip II of Macedon and Alexander the Great. We should be able to get through this fairly quickly. I'm sorry, I don't think I have too many Bible verses for us today. Again, we skip back and we see the division of the Greek Empire after Alexander. And again, this is after Alexander, so you can see how big the Grecian Empire had extended clear over to India and down into Egypt and Ethiopia. Pretty huge. But he only reigned for about 12 years before his death. So that's why it's so amazing. Boom, just the explosion of that Grecian Empire. Philip II of Macedon, who was Alexander's father, was born in 382 BC and died 21st of October 336 BC. He reigned from 359 BC until his death in 336 BC. And he was the king of ancient Macedonia.
So how do they know what month, the day? I mean, do they have records of that?
Yeah.
When his birthday was?
Getting back to this time in history and how the Greeks had recorded things, it's easier to tell the time periods and such. And of course, we talked about Macedonia being this upper area of Greece. And Greece had been, remembering our history, just groups of city-states like Athens and Sparta and Corinth and all of those. And Macedonia was a marginal participant to the dominant power in Greece. The dominant powers, as these city-states like Athens and Sparta would join together, Macedonia was like the red-headed stepchild. They didn't pay too much attention to it. So they felt like they were left out. And if anything happened with Persia, they would make treaties with Persia, alliances with Persia, on and off, alliances with Egypt, on and off. And the Macedonians always felt like, well, they're not giving us our due. We're not allowed to be a part of them, their groups. That allowed Philip, when he finally comes to power, to build up his military and to build up his kingdom. He concentrated on building his military rather than granting concessions to the Persians. In other words, he learned how to say no to the Persians as they make demands upon him. The Greeks really didn't all the time. They weren't able to say no. and especially if they couldn't form an alliance with Egypt or with some of the other city-states, they just, okay, we'll pay. We'll go along to get along. Didn't do them much good. So he developed new military techniques critical to securing victories on the battlefield. He concentrated on strength, strengthening his kingdom, strengthening his military so that he could withstand Persia. And again, going back to, look how far the supply lines and the battlefield had to be stretched to reach those northern areas of Greece, to reach Macedonia. It's a long ways off. You know, soldiers get tired of marching after a while. And when we get to the end of Alexander's, how do I want to put it, invasion in India, the reason he has to stop is because his soldiers mutiny. They are tired of being away from home. They want to go home. They mutiny. And he has to turn around and go back. It's just, you can only go so far for so long. Your men give up. So he developed those military techniques. He consolidated power by employing effective diplomacy and strategic marriage alliances. Of course, we see that all the time in our biblical studies. What did the Egyptians do? What did David do? And what did Solomon do? Well, same thing all other kings were doing. They were intermarrying, so, you know, hey, we're family. Let's not attack one another. It didn't work for a while, but eventually families fight, don't they? At the Battle of Caronia, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, in 383 BC, Philip defeated Athens and Thebes. So you have family fighting, Macedonia going against some of these city-states. And there he established the League of Corinth, which was a huge federation of the Greek states. And because he had done this, he became its commander-in-chief. And in doing that, what's the first thing he plans? He's going to invade Persia. Why not? They're the enemy. Their supply lines are stretched. Their soldiers are tired. And we're here, we're fresh, we're upcoming, we're on the rise. In October of 336 BC, Philip was assassinated by a bodyguard named Pausanias of Orestes. A trusted bodyguard assassinates the king.
Did he do it for Alexander, or what was his motive for doing it?
No, it is more likely that it was for the Persian emperor. We'll deal with that, I think, later. I did have a name. Yeah, we'll deal with that later. But then Alexander immediately succeeded to the throne. And Alexander was the chief of Philip's armies. He was a great military leader, so what he does, he becomes the king, and he carries on plans to invade Persia. So the king of Macedon, you know, from 336, from 338 to 336, 2 years that he has this great rise in power for Macedonia, essentially, and he's done. So that's really all we have with Philip. But the Grecian Empire, as we understand it, begins in 331 BC. Alexander the Great takes the throne 336 BC, and he's going to reign until 323 BC. As king of Macedonia, he conquered the ancient Near East from Greece to India. Again, saw that on the map. He's considered one of the greatest military leaders and strategists in history. I don't know that he lost very many battles. It's just that his armies got worn out. He spread the Hellenistic culture and language across the empire. And when we talk about Hellenistic, you've heard me use that term before, right? Even when we talk about New Testament things, right? Greece, and we talked last week about Helen of Troy and about the Trojan War and how Greece is kind of rising at that time. So the Greek culture, based off of that and the stories and maybe even some of the myths, the Hellenistic culture is that Greek Western culture. It's more of the democratic and democratic republic that eventually the Roman not the Roman Empire, but the Roman Republic takes into view. Not just here's a one man, a king, a tyrant who rules everything. So and use this term as it was used previously, the liberal concept of each man being his own ruler. What is it in our Declaration of Independence that each person is endowed by their Creator with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? What does that mean? That means we each are like the king of our own castle, our own home. Well, where does that idea come from? Well, it comes from the ancient Greeks, but essentially it comes from biblical principles. You have God, and you have man. And when you have men coming in between and the state coming in between, whether it is a dictator, whether it is a government in the form of communism, socialism, what have you, that's where problems develop. So you can understand the liberal concept that the founding fathers of the United States had are not the liberal concepts that are in play today. So that's the Hellenistic culture. And language. He made them speak Greek, he brought in the gods, he brought in the culture. The language was particularly important though, wasn't it? Because everybody then in the known, what we call the known world, began to speak Greek. And when we come to the New Testament, what language was the New Testament essentially written in and transmitted to us in? Koine Greek. So you can see how that's affected biblical thought. He died in Babylon, not the nation, but the town of Babylon at the age of 32. 323 BC. And there's speculation about his death. I always heard that he died in a drunken stupor. but that might not be the case. He might have had malaria, he might have been assassinated. Scholars are all over the place with that. But everyone pretty much agrees he was a great military leader and strategist. He gained the throne when his father was assassinated in 336 BC. In 333 BC, Alexander defeated a massive Persian army led by King Darius III. Remember, we talked about him and the Battle of Issus. It is suspected that King Darius III had something to do with Philip of Macedon's assassination. Okay? And that was the name I was trying to recall there a moment ago. Alexander's forces were greatly outnumbered, but they were more experienced in battle. Darius III fled from the battlefield. Remember, who did he desert? His mother, his wife, and his children. And Alexander adopted the motto, "There's nothing impossible to him who will try." That's not biblical, is it? I was reading an article this morning. I think it was 15 or 18 things that people think the Bible said that the Bible doesn't say. You gotta be careful. In 332 BC, Alexander took the Phoenician cities on the Mediterranean Sea. Tyre, Sidon, remember, do I need to go back to the map? Back to the map. So that's slide 68 there.
That's all the Aegeans, no.
On the Mediterranean. Yeah. Alexander starts here and he comes down. The Battle of Issus, I think, is in this area. He comes on down. The first thing he does, he takes these cities. Right? What happens then, that destroys the Persian Empire's ability for their naval fleets to help. Remember, they had developed a great naval fleet to come up and attack Greece and Egypt. So he takes these cities, Tyre, Sidon, kind of down through here. Now, what's that affecting? The region around Judea. So I would really emphasize that.
Whose library book did they burn? Did they burn down and lost all of the...
That's Alexandria. That's over in this area, but that will be later. Oh, 60. Yeah. Okay. So Tyre was under siege for 6 months before its walls were breached. In that period, Alexander amassed a large navy himself to assist in the attack on Tyre. Thousands of Tyrians were executed simply for defying Alexander's demand to surrender. Okay? So it's under siege for 6 months. 6 months he's telling them, surrender, surrender, surrender. They don't surrender. So finally, he gets his navy out there. They're surrounded. They've got no chance. When they finally give up, he just slaughters them. Should have given up. In 332 BC, a little later, Alexander conquered Egypt. So you see what he does. He comes down, he takes around the Mediterranean first, and then he's going to head east. He was welcomed by the Egyptians as a liberator from the Persians. And we talked about how the Persians and the fighting over what we would call the Promised Land. And back and forth, that affected Judea. It's going to continue later on. But the Egyptians saw him as a liberator. He crowned himself as the ruler of Egypt in Memphis, not Tennessee and not Texas. Memphis, Egypt, which was the capital then. And he established the city of, guess what he named it? Alexandria, where the library eventually was going to be established. So, and he's essentially the new Pharaoh. So he left Egypt under the control of his officers as he continued eastward. In October of 331 BC, the Greeks and Persians met in the Battle of Gaugamela. Not guacamole, Gaugamela. All right? Darius III fled, and again he flees, and was assassinated by Bessus, one of his counselors. Alexander then proclaimed himself king of Persia, but Bessus also claimed the Persian throne. I killed the king, I get to be king. Alexander says, no, doesn't work that way. So Bessus's troops eventually handed Bessus over to Ptolemy, Alexander's ally. So down in Egypt, there was this Ptolemy who had been ruling Egypt, and Alexander, left him in charge. Bessus hands Darius, or Bessus over to him, and the troops hand Bessus over to him, and what happens? Well, Ptolemy mutilates, executes Bessus. So at that point, Alexander had full control of Persia. 331 BC, and that's why scholars would date that as what? The beginning of the Grecian Empire. The Persian Empire is completely destroyed. Did I skip one there? So now we'll talk about Alexander's downfall. Do you have any questions going up? And I know this is kind of sipping through it because there isn't a lot of information pertinent to the Bible, okay? We'll get to some biblical things, but just remember, Judea is stuck in the middle of all of this. The Jews are stuck in the middle of all of this. They've come back from exile, they've rebuilt the temple, but they're stuck in all this geopolitical conflict. So, to placate the Persians, Alexander adopted many Persian customs. He began dressing like a Persian. Have you seen pictures of the Persians, how they dress with the pointy-toed shoes and the turbans and the robes and stuff? And different from the Greeks, how did the Greeks dress? They'd have a simple tunic, wouldn't they? Sandals. Maybe a garland that they would wear for their hair, for their head. Well, he starts dressing like a Persian and acting like a Persian. He adopted the practice of proskyneus. Proskyneus. That's a Greek word. And proskyneus meant that whenever someone would come into a Persian official's presence, say it was Darius III, they would come in to see Darius III, they'd have to bow down in front of him. Darius would hold out his hand. The person who come in would grab the hand and kiss the hand. Proskuneus means to kiss, to bow down and kiss the hand that is extended. Understand the concept?
Like the royals do today.
Like the royals do today. Like somebody else kind of has that. Yeah. Catholics, if you go to the Pope, what do? You bow down and you kiss his ring, right?
Even the higher up bishops, isn't it? I don't know.
Cardinals.
That's right under the Pope, right?
Okay.
I don't know much.
Right.
Okay. Why do I have John chapter 4, verse 20 there? That's one you ought to have memorized. You have it memorized? What? No.
I like it.
John 4. Jesus is talking to the woman at the well in Macedon, Samaria. Right? You don't have that memorized? That one. See what that says? God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. My olive tree Bible program that I've got on here has Strong's Concordance on it, and I just pressed on worship, and the word there is proskuneo. Meaning to kiss like a dog licking his master's hand, to fawn, crouch, prostrate oneself in homage, due reference to adore, worship. That's the Greek word for worship. One of the Greek words. I'll put it that way. I told you the Greek language was important, right? For the whole deal. So he develops this, but where did the practice come from? From the Persians, and he adopted it from the Persians. It comes, then the Greek language, what happens when Christianity comes? And the language comes into the Bible, into the New Testament. Koine Greek. Why is it called Koine Greek? The Latin, Jerome's Latin Bible is called the Vulgate, right? Which is from the word vulgar. We think of something being vulgar as being, that's bad, but it's not. It's common. It's common. So the Latin that Jerome translated the Greek into, which is the common Latin language. The Koine Greek is just the common language that everybody used. So you can see how that, to kiss the hand that's extended to you, bow down, kiss the hand that's extended to you, that's giving worship, that's giving adoration. Now we can understand that when we're talking about God. Michelangelo's picture of God and Adam in the Sistine Chapel, what's God doing? God's reaching down a finger and Adam's reaching up, right? But Adam's eyes are on Eve. You know, his heart's with Eve. Yeah, I want to be like God, but there's Eve. But you see the point, you know, and that's what I'm trying. This concept here, right? A Persian court custom, bowing and kissing the hand of the rulers, one of the Greek New Testament words for worship. The Macedonians considered this as an attempt to be viewed as deity. He was at that point claiming to be a son of God. Like so many rulers, going clear back to Pharaoh, and maybe even before, that the ruler is the son of God. Son of God, son of God, son of God. Who else is going to take this designation? Octavius, Augustus Caesar, right? He's the Son of God. When Jesus comes, who is the Son of God, we can't have two sons of God. Of course, at the time he's crucified, I believe Tiberius is the emperor. But you see the point here. Okay? The Macedonians themselves refused the practice of proskynesis, and some plotted his death at that time. So that's why it's kind of, well, did he die in a drunken stupor? Did he catch malaria and die? Or was he maybe assassinated? Was he poisoned? Because he was becoming like a Persian. And the liberal, old school, classical liberals, we're not having this. Does that make sense? Okay.
Hey, God is spirit, and those who worship must worship Him in spirit and truth.
Him.
I was close.
Yeah. So worship Him would be to do what? To bow down and kiss the hand that's God's extending His hand toward us, right? So draw near to God. What will He do? Draw near to Him. But that's what we do in worship. We're drawing near to God. And we should bow down, bow our hearts down, and we should kiss the hand that's extended to us. And there's another passage, what, kiss the Son, lest He be angry with you. A lot of things that go along with that. All right. So, when some plotted Alexander's death, what happens then? Alexander grew paranoid, ordered the death of his best general, Parmenio, in 330 BC. Parmenio's son, Philotas, had been convicted of plotting an assassination against Alexander. So what happens when leaders become paranoid? They start doing foolish things, making bad decisions. In 328 BC, Cletus was another general fed up with Alexander's Persian-like persona. The Battle of Sogdia, Alexander fell in love with Roxanne and married her despite her Sogdian heritage, and she joined him on his journey. All right? Sogdia, let me go back here. Sogdia, I believe, was a region, I can remember the maps where I saw it, up in maybe this area. And they were strong people, fortified. They were having trouble. They had to besiege that area. And they're besieging it, and Alexander's out there looking, and he looks up, and there is Roxanne. And it's love at first sight. So they destroy them, but he takes her and he marries her. And, you know, they kill everybody else, but he marries her and takes her as they go down, and then try to invade what's modern day India. So the generals don't like that. Right? Why do you marry the enemy? Especially when so many of his soldiers had died trying to take that area. So Cletus took to insulting Alexander and diminishing his accomplishments. It's like you're not so great, Alexander. Look what you did. You know, and your soldiers are doing all the work. Your generals are doing all the work. You're just sitting back enjoying. You're acting like a Persian and this and that. You can imagine all. So Alexander, in a drunken rage, killed Cletus with a spear. Just outright murdered him. In 327 to 326 BC, Alexander marched on Punjab in India. And I believe that's a region there. At Hydaspes, Bucephalus, Alexander's beloved horse, died. And you'd have to go back and read some of the history. Alexander felt that he was great because he weakened. That's an old-time cowboy word. He weakened that horse. Nobody else could weaken that horse. He weakened that horse, and that was his horse. He rode it. It was a beautiful horse, and when his horse dies, it seems like his life falls apart. He was so distraught, he named the city Bucephala after his horse. And what it seems like is that he cared more for his horse than he did for his soldiers. His horse dies, he names a city after his horse. He marries a woman that his soldiers, how many died, taking an area, a city, but he cared more for the horse than he did for the soldiers. Now, at the Battle of Hydaspes, that marked Alexander's farthest advance to the Indian subcontinent. With larger kingdoms to the east and tired from years of war, his army mutinied. With larger Alexander was forced to turn back toward Macedonia. In his retreat down the Indus River, he was severely wounded in a battle with the Mali. That's a tribe of people there. He sent half his army back to Persia, leaving the rest at Gedrosia, a desolate area west of the Indus River. So he's going to try to protect what he's taken, but he leaves half there. He sends the other half back to Persia and probably back to Susa. In early 324 BC, Alexander reached the city of Susa in Persia. Remember, Susa was the ancient capital of Persia. We'll read about that even in the book of Daniel, right? Alexander ordered many of his officers then to marry a wedding. You understand that? So here he's got all these Macedonian and Greek officers in his army. He takes them, they mutiny, he comes back here. What's he trying to do? He's trying to be a Persian. He forces his officers to marry Persian women. What's he doing? He wanted to create a new race of Persians and Macedonians loyal only to him. He wanted to start a new race. He also took 2 wives for himself, okay? If you read about history, and you read some of the sociological material, there's a lot of material about how that people from the region in Persia come into Europe and how the languages are similar and how some of the genetics are there and in many of the European cultures now. Do you ever wonder how that started? Now you've got an understanding of it. It's from Alexander, trying to start a new race. Remember what I told you? Before, in biblical history, you had the descendants of Ham fighting the Shemites, causing problems for Judeans. But now you have the introduction of the family of Japheth coming in. And now what's he doing? Bringing the Semites in and trying to create a new race for that whole area who would be loyal to him. Are you following along with this? We're talking about his downfall. So, the Macedonian army resented his attempt to change their culture, and many mutinied. Now his officers are mutinying. Alexander replaced Macedonian officers and troops. Well, if he's replacing his Macedonian officers and troops, who's he replacing them with? Persian officers and troops. That doesn't go over very well, does it? No. And he then returned titles to many Persians. So when it comes and Darius III is killed, he takes over these satraps, however you want to pronounce it, that are ruling. They lose their power. Now what does he do? He gives them their power back. Takes away power of his officers, his political people. He's killing himself. He's killing his power. Something's going wrong with him. And that's basically what's going on. So by 323 BC, Alexander was the head of an enormous empire. He began then plans to conquer Arabia with his reconstituted army. But he dies suddenly, and again, the real cause of his death is still unknown. His death led to a bloody infighting for control of the empire. The empire he fought to create unraveled and was divided among 4 remaining generals. And that's what we will begin to take a look at next week. That's just the introduction to it. And there is the 4 areas at the beginning. And remember, I told you that we needed to look at this because as that first map that I had up there, showed this area where Judea is under the control of the Egyptians, correct? Or pretty much. We're going to deal with a man by the name of Antigonus first. So this goes back before what that other map showed. That other map was after the Greek Civil Wars. This is basically during that period of the Grecian Civil Wars after Alexander's death. All right. Do you have questions? Boring, boring, boring. But again, it's where we have to work through to get to the period that is really going to be more interesting as we talk about the Maccabean period, when there's a rise in Judaism and they actually started fighting back against the